it's my great pleasure to welcome back Sam Bardelson to talk to us today about Peru. Sam was a cartographer with the U.S. Geological Society and moved to Seattle in 2003, working in the old red brick federal building, and retired in 2007. And since then, he and his wife Suzanne have been traveling the world, and we have had the pleasure of seeing him about 6 weeks ago in Guatemala and Costa Rica, and today we're still in South America. He is going to take us to Peru. So welcome, Sam.
Thanks, Janet. And let's get started if I can. Now, allow. Okay, and we're going, and tell me if how this looks. Is it okay?
That's perfect.
Okay, so Peru is the brown country on the west side. It is almost 500,000 square miles, which is about twice the size of Texas. As you can tell, I'm a cartographer and a geographer, so I always have to set the region or the anyway, what we're seeing. There's three main parts of Peru. There's the coast, there's the mountains, the highlands, the Sierra, and the selva, which is the jungle, which is actually 60% of the country. The population of Peru is 32 million. Lima, the capital, has right there in kind of the middle on the coast, has 9+ million people. Iquitos, which we're going to go to first in the jungle, which is up in the northern part of Peru, has about 500,000 people. And Cusco, which is in the mountains in the south part, has also a little over 400,000 people. So those are the three main cities in Peru. And let's get started. So this was an OAT trip. OAT is Overseas Adventure Travel. It's the first time I traveled with them, and I went with Annie Kwan, who's on the call, and Kimi Kanoshita, who's on the Senior Center board, and her husband, Gary Nakamura. So the four of us traveled. Basically, Kimi and Gary said, we're going to go to see Machu Picchu. You want to go? And I said, yeah. So that's how that happened. And as Janet said, if anybody has any questions or Annie, you want to add something, just speak up. Because at this point, I'm full screen on my computer, so I cannot see anyone else. So this is Iquitos. It's the largest city in the world that is not reachable by road. You fly in there, or you get in there by the river because it's on the Amazon. And so a lot of the transportation, you do see some cars, but a lot of them are these little motorcycle driven things. And just a few quick shots of what Iquitos looks like. It was a big town at various times. As I remember, there was like tin found near there, and probably part of the rubber boom at one point, although I think that was mostly in Brazil. And so this is just a quick representation of what Iquitos, the city in the jungle, looks like. The reason we went in June, early June to late June, because that was the end of the rainy season, and it was for the most part pretty dry. So this is probably the beginning of winter, but Iquitos is not that far from the equator, so there's not a huge difference. But they do have a dry season and a wet season. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Don't. Okay. So now we're getting on a boat, and we're going to go down the Amazon a little ways to a lodge called the Explorame Lodge. This is one of our member, and then the guide, the man on the left there, is Segundo, who was our guide in the Amazon. So here's Gary and Kimi and Annie going from left to right on the boat, and we're going down river. And so we're on fairly close to the edge of the river, and we're going to the Explorame Lodge, where we spend 2 nights. This is what it looks like from the boat. Generally, I'll go back here a second. When we traveled around in this part of the trip, we were on little boats. There were 6 people on this part of the trip, the 4 of us from Bainbridge and a couple from Fresno. And this boat is a traveling grocery store, essentially. And it would dock up at, probably had a set schedule, and people would come and buy what they needed. So here's part of the Amazon and the clouds. And one of the first things we did there is we took a tour in the little boat, the 6 of us and the boat driver and the guide, and went out and looked at wildlife and went up little channels. The clouds are amazing. Right in the middle of this picture, and this was a blow up, is a sloth up in the tree. And unfortunately, I think all I had was a wide angle lens and my iPhone, so none of my Zoom pictures are particularly good, but take it from me. So Segundo's in the front there. We're just going to look for wildlife, and here's an area with big lily pads. These were maybe 3 feet across, as I remember. And bromeliads, maybe, various sort of kind of swampy vegetation. And Segundo's just looking around, and the clouds that day were just phenomenal, I thought.
Yeah.
Definitely a kind of area I had never been before. So the place we were staying the first 2 nights was the Explorame Lodge. It's kind of just right of center. It is pretty funky. You'll see a picture of the room here in a minute. Then upriver, which is going to the left or the west, there's a little town called Indiana, which we will stop at further on in some of my pictures, and the Explorama Inn, which is a much nicer place where we spent the last 2 nights. It's more like a motel. You'll see just an outside picture there because the rooms just look like motel rooms. But we went to Indiana further on at one point and crossed over to the Napo River, and then went over to the Explorame Lodge, which is up there kind of in the north. And that's where we did the canopy walkway, which you'll see. So there's just, again, a map to get some idea of where we are. Iquitos is down in the bottom, sort of middle left in the bottom, and then downriver to Brazil is to the right. And so one interesting thing, we're there in Iquitos. We're, I think, roughly 2,000 river miles from the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and the elevation is like 300 feet. And so it's pretty amazing to me that there's just no relief, and yet there's this major river. So it's just it's nothing I've ever seen before. So this is in the lodge. They use these to call people to come have dinner. They pound on it. Here's a picture of the lodge. There was a bunch of high school kids from, I think, Indiana when we were there, but there weren't a lot of other people. They had a bar, and then the dining room is in the back there. And then this is our rooms in the first lodge. So we have cots. They've got mosquito netting all around, and behind, so this is my cot with my pack on another bed, and the bathroom is the little thing behind my cot there. That is screened, so you can go in and take a shower. They didn't have hot water, but it wasn't all that warm, but warm enough so that you could manage to do that. And everything else is open. So you see the lattice there, that's all open. The roof is a, typical kind of A, but it's open on both ends. And at night it got really noisy with animals. And, but I, felt cocooned there in my mosquito netting. So this is us typically, like we're going out. Here's the 6 of us, the 4 Bainbridge people in front. Segundo took this picture, and then the couple from Fresno, and then our boat driver, whose name I've forgotten, unfortunately, behind. And there's me and Gary, and there's Annie baiting a hook because we went fishing for piranha. And there's the boat driver, and he's hooked one, and he's unhooking it, and they're kind of pretty gold fish. But you can see there the teeth, and here's a close-up, and you can see the rows of teeth they have. They're interesting little animals. And we took them back and they cooked them for lunch. And boy, are they bony. And speaking of food, as Segundo would say when we were eating, he'd say, tonight we're having rice and beans, tomorrow beans and rice. And that was pretty true. We had rice and beans every meal, and luckily I like those. So here's Fred from Fresno and I, maybe not so sure about eating piranha. So then we went, one of the days, we went for a walk through the jungle a little bit. And there's a frog. And we went to a native village. And so to the right there is a big kind of conical structure, which I think was their meeting hall. And they all met us there in their traditional outfits. And it was really dark in there. And that's why these pictures are so blurry, because to get any kind of exposure, it was long enough so everybody blurred out. And but actually, I kind of like these pictures. So here's the head man, and they welcomed us, and we got to march around or dance around with them, although for me it seemed more like a march. And then we went to their village, and they had things for sale, which is a recurring theme in Peru, people selling things to tourists and each other. And then we did blow darts. And so he was demonstrating, the man there, and Annie's trying it there, and I'm trying it here. We all have our mosquito clothing on too, which maybe isn't evident, but we were paranoid about malaria. I was taking malaria pills. I'd had a yellow fever shot, just because we were going to the jungle. And anyway, none of us got sick. We did stop at a little place where this guy makes his own liquor. And sold it. And I bought a bottle that it turned out I thought I was buying liquor, and I was just buying corn syrup. So I left it in a motel room or a hotel room somewhere. But he was an interesting guy. He had a bunch of sugarcane growing in the back, and he would run the cane through the press and extract the cane juice and ferment it and make alcohol. This is the clinic. We went to a village that wasn't a native village, but it was a village where people are living. Yanamano, I believe, is the name of the village. It's the name of the clinic anywhere there, as you can see on the sign. And this is the doctor, and she talked about, what kills people and, what kind of cases she sees. There are snakes in the Amazon, and it's the fer de lance, I believe, is the most prevalent one. And if you're bitten by a fer de lance, you have 8 hours to get the antidote. It doesn't kill you immediately like other snakes will. But if you're 8 hours away from somewhere where you can get an antidote, you're not going to make it. And so you'll see a lot of the huts and the houses are up on stilts. It's to keep them off the ground and away from the snakes, hopefully. And so this is a tour through this little village. I believe this is the school, and some of the kids, and a woman and one of her kids. And we stopped there because I think she was a friend of Segundo, our guide, and I think she gave him something to eat. He was like eating all the time. It seemed. And here's a evangelical church. And we're leaving the area, little boy. This is a typical view of what a lot of the area looks like, just kind of flooded and wet. And here's Segundo and our driver. We spent a lot of time with. The two of the most fun things we did, the 2 nights at the more primitive lodge, we got in one of these boats and went out after dark and went up one of the tributaries to look for wildlife. And Segundo sat in front, and the driver sat in the back, and they kept their eyes peeled, and we saw sleeping birds and small mammals and snakes and the night sky. It was really exciting, but I have no pictures of that because it was pretty pitch black. So this is the little village of Indiana. and there's a market going on, and so I took some pictures of some of the things you see in the market. These are snails of some sort, big snails. And I think there's catfish behind that, but here's some other catfish and chickens, typical market. And now we're walking over to where we're going to meet the little, and I can't remember the name they call them in South America, but tuk-tuks in other places. And we basically cross that little isthmus that I showed on the map to get to the Rio Napo, and we're going to go to the other lodge and go on the canopy walk. So here's the third lodge. This one is even more primitive than the one we were in, it seemed, and a lot of scientists stay there to study various things, and they have this canopy walk, and that was set up for scientists to study the canopy of the rainforest to see what's going on there. So we're coming into that lodge. There's monkeys eating bananas that they put out. That's a capybara, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Annie. And here's a map of the platforms, and you start there at the right where it says Departure Tower, I believe. Well, no, that would be, you go up to Platform 1, Access Tower, that's it. Duh. So you walk in and you go on the Access Tower and you climb and you get higher and higher until eventually you're a couple hundred feet up in the air. And here's stairs going up, and here's what the walkways look like. And they're pretty, not as stable as I would have liked. Is not a big fan of heights, and they would only want 2 people at a time on them because of weight. So there's Kimi and Gary and Annie, and no pictures of me with my terrified face, sorry. So then we went to the other lodge after we came back from the canopy walk, and you can see it looks, well, maybe you can't because I don't think I took any pictures outside, but there's a swimming pool, and some of the people staying there seemed a lot more touristy than the people staying at the lodge we stayed at the first 2 nights. And there's a tapir, I believe, and there were 2 of them that hung around. This is the little one, and Kimi's making friends, and Annie's making friends. One of the things we went to was walk through this ethno-botanical garden where companies are looking for cures in the rainforest, and asking local people. And right near there is this guy who was a shaman. So he's giving us a lecture. He did a little curing ceremony for 3 of us at a time, which I don't have any good pictures of. He talked about how he became a shaman, and he took ayahuasca, which is a psychedelic drug, and went out and lived in the jungle by himself for 3 months or 6 months or something. And that was part of his training to be a shaman, plus learning all of the lore that is passed on from previous shaman. At this point, he's giving us a tattoo. He's painting something on our arms, which is going on clear. Excuse me. And this was the next day, and it starts to appear, and it lasted about 3 weeks. It didn't make it to when I got home.
So Sam, may I ask, is the jungle being attacked like it is in Brazil, in Peru?
I didn't see so much of it, but they talked about people, like in the village, the men would go out and farm a plot, and they do slash and burn, which is only good for a season or 2, and then you've used up all the nutrients in the soil, and you have to go somewhere else. So that's going on. I did not see the large-scale cutting down of trees for cattle ranches like Brazil is doing. But there is a picture later on of a bunch of tree trunks that were coming into Iquitos up the river. One thing I did notice when we left Iquitos and took the boat down to where we stayed, there were cell phone towers all the way down. So a lot of people don't have bathrooms or clean water, but they have cell phones, which is, I guess, true in a lot of the third world. One of the last things we did in the Amazon was go to a wildlife protection place. This was the guy that was working there, and the first thing that was happening is the monkeys attacked us, and they were really grabby with soft little hands, and I think they took Annie's glasses or something. She will have to expand on that if she wants. And but the guy would chase them down and get back whatever they took. So I don't think any of us lost anything. And they had birds, toucan, well, I don't know what they all are, and a sloth. And here's my wife's favorite picture of me, I believe. Me and the sloth, and you can see it's a three-toed sloth. There are three-toed and two-toed. And Annie made a friend. And I can't remember what this guy is. And this very weird looking turtle that almost looks more armored than a normal turtle. Like his head has armor on it.
Sam, is that a catamundi?
Oh, could be. But I don't know. Or something similar.
Similar, yeah.
So they had this pen that was mostly water, and in there was an anaconda that they took out. And he was a relatively small one, I guess, as compared to how they can get. And we all got to hold him, lucky us. I was last, and by the time I got him, 6 of us, he did not want to be held anymore, and he was trying to get away. And there's nothing I could have done. He was way stronger than I was. So anyway, now we're about to head back up to Iquitos and fly back to Lima. So this will end the pre-trip of this tour of Peru called Real Affordable Peru, is how it bills this trip. So we're waiting for this boat, and I think they were taking this big boat. We took a much smaller one down. I think they were taking it up to meet a big group. So we got to sit on it, just the 6 of us, and had a bar, and just slowly tooled up the river, and it was great. We liked it. So here's what I mentioned, all the big tree trunks. It's hard to get scale, but I would guess some of them are 4 feet across, because I believe there's a guy like right in the middle standing near the front there. So that gives you some idea of their size. So 2 big barges of tree trunks. And this is where one of the other rivers is coming into the Amazon. I just took it because the waters are mixing there, a real muddy river hitting the Amazon. And the last picture of Iquitos. Now we're in Lima, which is where we originally flew in. The coastal Peru on the west coast is foggy a lot, gets very little rain, like 2 inches a year on average. But a lot of water comes down from the mountains, so that's how it supports a city of 9 million people. We were staying in the Miraflores District, which is a very upscale part of Lima, and safe. So here's just some pictures of what the Miraflores District looks like. Went to this handicrafts market and spent some money. This is a park right in the middle, and one of the interesting things about this park is there's a ton of cats that live there. I couldn't get more than 1 or 2 in a picture, and I don't know why particularly, but there were a lot. Right near the Miraflores, I don't know, maybe a quarter, half mile from where we were staying, is this ruin and this is a pyramid that they're gradually excavating. And you look up the history and they call it the Lima people because they don't even know for sure who built it or particularly when, because it was built and then other cultures took it over. A lot of brickwork. There were burial sites. One thing I forgot to do, I mentioned I was going to say right at the beginning, there's a really interesting book called 1491, written by Charles, oh, now I've forgotten, which I've read twice, which talks about the history of the Western Hemisphere before Columbus and before smallpox and Spanish conquistadors and everything else. There were a lot of civilizations in South America that maybe predated the Sumerians even. So among the world's first cultures and civilizations. It's a really eye-opening book. I would recommend it to anybody. Charles C. Mann, that's it, M-A-N-N. And he also wrote a second book called 1493, which is about what he calls the Post-Columbian Exchange, where people and foods like potatoes and corn and tomatoes came from different parts of the world to, from the old world, from the new world to the old world, if you want to use those terms. And a lot of Spanish silver, which there was the world's largest silver mine, was in Bolivia, went to China, and silks came back and spices. So that's also a really interesting book, just if anybody wants something. So these are now on the right. There is Freddy Delgado, who was our guide. In Peru, you have to have a local guide, and so the guy on the left there is the Lima guide, and he had actually met us when we first flew into Lima before we went to Iquitos, and then he had basically a one-day tour of Lima. Excuse me. We went to the National Museum and saw a few artifacts. Gold. The Spanish didn't get all the gold in Peru, although they certainly got plenty. Here's a big church. And now we're flying out. And I just threw this in because this was the landmark at the airport in Lima to me. We went through that airport 5 times altogether. And right outside the door was this enormous advertisement for Coca-Cola. And anyway, I don't know what it means. It's interesting. So now we're in Cusco. Cusco was the capital city for the Incas. It's at 11,200 feet. And now where we are is probably pushing 12,000 feet because we're up above the city. The airport is to the left, just out of the picture. Planes would come from the right and zoom around, and for us, make a U-turn and land. And it was, kind of exciting. But I didn't feel unsafe or anything. The Incas were a relatively recent culture. They had taken over from previous cultures like the Aymara and I can't remember the others, but their most famous leader was a man named Pachacuti, who in the 1400s basically consolidated the Incan Empire and extended it from Bolivia and probably a little south all the way up to Ecuador. So all through the Andes there, they were a mountain civilization, was the Inca culture. Pizarro came in 1532 with the Spanish conquistadors. They came down from Central America looking for gold and riches and excuse me, especially these days, I'm not used to talking so much. And basically, they conquered the Incas almost immediately for several reasons. One was they were a Iron Age culture. They had steel, horses, and gunpowder, none of which the Incas had. And the Incas had been also had a round of smallpox from earlier earlier people from Europe who brought smallpox and devastated whole cultures. So they'd had smallpox come through, and then they were also having a civil war. Pachacuti had died and had 2 sons, one in the south and one in the north, who were fighting each other, and one had just beat the other when the Spanish showed up, so they were weakened. And without much resistance, they were conquered. So the last resistance, thanks, Suzanne. The last resistance was in 1572, so 40 years after Pizarro showed up, basically they had conquered the Incas. And really the only time that Incas ever prevailed was in skirmishes when they could roll rocks down on the horses, because there was no, they didn't, the Spanish had no defense for that. So just to mention, 1879 was the start of the 5-Year War of the Pacific, and it was kind of the beginning of the Republic of Peru. Or maybe that was, no, I take that back. That was the fight between Peru and Bolivia versus Chile, where Chile won and took Bolivia's access to the sea. If you look at the map, Bolivia is landlocked now. It used to have a route out to the ocean. So consequently, Peruvians and Chileans do not like each other particularly. So anyway, here we are in Cusco. We flew in 11,200 feet. You walk off the plane and you feel it. At least I sure did. I felt lightheaded. Freddy, our guide's wife, met us there. She had Coca Tea, which is a mild stimulant. It's not cocaine. It's what cocaine is derived from. And it's the traditional Quechua, or the Indians, their method of dealing with altitude. So it's a mild stimulant, and it seems to help. And so even all the hotels and, well, mostly hotels, but the markets would have coca leaves, and you would take them and make tea, or you can just chew them. So while I was at altitude, I would do that, and I think we all did. So basically, we're leaving Cusco right away and going to the Sacred Valley, which is about 2,000 feet lower. It's roughly 9,000 feet. And we're going to stay there for a couple of days and help acclimatize to the altitude. One of the things you see there is people in their native dress with animals, and for 50 cents or a couple of coins, you can take their picture. And that's what she's doing there. And so now we've gone over the hills from Cusco down into the Sacred Valley. It's much drier there. You can see some of the terracing that people have done. And the river is at the bottom, which we will see again many times. Shoot, I don't remember what that vegetation in the front left is, but there's berries of some sort there. So the first Inca site we went to was Pisac. It was close to where probably the closest site to Cusco. It's anyway, a lot of terracing, just phenomenal, the terracing and the stonework that the Incas did, and some ruins also. And I think we were all a little shell-shocked with the altitude at that point. So this is where we stayed for 2 nights in the Sacred Valley. And it was a very nice place. It had internet, but the walls of the inn were like 3 feet thick, so the internet was actually not in the room. So people would sit out in the chair and check their email. There's Gary. Although at this point, it looks like he's just contemplating things. This, I think, was in the dining room. And the second night we were there was a young couple from Lima who were coming down to get married. And they had a native guy do kind of a ceremony. I think this was maybe a Thursday night, and they were getting married Saturday or something. So well in advance. But the hotel was full of the guests from Lima. And
so may I interrupt you? I am
Sure.
stuck on pictures of the Sacred Valley. Oh, that's better. Thank you.
It was stuck?
Yes.
Huh. Is it okay now?
Yes. We're now looking at probably a couple who are about to get married.
Okay. I don't know what happened. Well, anyway, that was the place. Let's go back. Nothing earth-shaking. Here was we're getting ready, and the next morning, and the first thing we do is we take a raft trip down the river. This is now the main trip. There were 13 of us, the 6 of us from the pre-trip plus 7 more people. and we're going down the river that you saw in the earlier pictures that was down in the valley, but it's further downriver, so it's much bigger. And this, if you see, there's 3 little pods up the top of this cliff. You could actually spend the night up there. I can't imagine, as kind of an acrophobe, why anybody would want to do that. But, and there were people rock climbing up to them. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. This is the train to Aguas Calientes, which goes to then Machu Picchu. We went under it, as not on it yet. More terracing. Anytime you see really good stonework, it's Incan, because they were masters. And as we were driving to the next site, which was called Hollande Tombo, we saw these people plowing the fields. And so the bus stopped, Freddy got out and talked to him, and he waved us all out, and we talked to the farmer, and he told us what he was doing. And some of us, there's Kimi, even got to use the plow and plow the field a little bit. So now we're at Hollande Tombo. Was the royal estate of Pachacuti. So it was probably made in the mid 1400s. Again, impressive stonework. There's like ruins at the top, and there's a village at the bottom. And so now we're kind of part way up the stairs, I think, looking back down at the village, and then there's another ruin across the way there. And here's an example of the Incan stonework and how they fit the stones together amazingly. And as a royal estate, this stonework is especially well done, especially if you look at the left side. Those big blocks put together are just phenomenal. And looking down the valley, this is a very famous site that I can't remember the name of. Sorry.
Sexy Woman, isn't it?
Sorry?
I had gone, believe it or not, to this area without probably 10 years before you.
Okay.
And I think that was an area called Sexy Woman.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say to Janet.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to get to Sexy Woman, or Sexy Woman. And so I think this is still in Hollande Tombo. But I could be wrong, because my pictures got jumbled up, and I spent about 3 hours trying to get them back in order. But the stonework in both those places is phenomenal. So this is in the village, these little alleys, and this woman has her baby slung on the back. And we went into this residence, and Freddy has a plow there, I think. But the most interesting thing to me was the cuy, the guinea pigs that they raise in Peru and eat, are just kind of scurrying around the floor there. And as someone who is not a big rodent fan, that kind of bothered me a little. But I don't know what that doll was, but I really can't remember what was going on there, but it was interesting, I thought. So Annie, if you can remember, let me know. I think this is couscous, which is one of the native crops. Potatoes, of course, thousands of varieties of potatoes. Couscous, I think there's 5 different kinds. And then they also eat lupin seeds. They grow lupin to eat. So here's the cuy, or guinea pigs again. So one of the things you do at Ode is you go to a home-hosted lunch. So now we're visiting this woman, and she is preparing lunch, and we're helping in a lot of cases. Annie there in the middle next to her. And she's cooking, I can't remember, some kind of, but anyway, here's the roasted cuy that we all got to try, our guinea pig. Yeah. I just had a really small piece. It was fine. It didn't taste like much of anything. So you do see a lot of vendors, and things in Peru are very colorful. And we went to a weaving place where this is, I think, the head man. It's kind of a cooperative, and they demonstrated various parts of weaving. They've got anybody from the bar and fiber arts would know this better than I do, but you can see they have spools there. And this guy did kind of an incantation and a ceremony. And then the women talked about what they do. And some of us there's Gary in the middle, got to wear the native costumes. And now she's talking about dyeing the wool. And they have various things, Yanacera, Kinsakuchu, for the various colors. And she's talking about that. And now we get to dip some of the wool into the dye pots. And Jackie, that's Jackie from Wisconsin, and I are weaving there. And this woman was our guide. And then we stopped at a place, and this is probably out of order, where it's a chicha place. Chicha is a fermented corn that's kind of Peruvian beer. It's about the same alcohol. And they have a game where they pitch these gold coins into these various holes and keep score somehow. And then we went in this room and they explained how they make chicha, the fermented beer. And they had a yellow variety, which is basically the plain chicha, and a strawberry variety. Up here. Well, we went to a little town, and Freddy each gave us a couple of words in Spanish, or maybe even Quechua, and we had to walk around the market and find out what they were and buy them, and then drive to or catch a ride in the little tuk-tuk vehicle and go to the town square. And so that was kind of fun. It was like the Amazing Race we got to do. So here's the market. Here's chicken and carrots and tomatoes and limes and peppers and onions and things I don't know. And then we went to this building, which is a cuy farm, or where he's raising guinea pigs. And unfortunately, that was a day I did not feel well. And I was the first one in line. And we went in this building that had like thousands of guinea pigs. This picture does not do it justice as its size. And I was at the far end and I could not get out. And we're going on this long conversation and I'm getting sicker and sicker. And luckily we got out before anything bad happened. And then we got to take a nice walk in the country, and this is really scenic, I think, of just out in the countryside of Peru. Pretty high elevation. People are bringing in various crops and the mountains and the water, and we also visited a school. And so this young man who I'm with came out to greet me and brought us in. And, you know, it wasn't a long visit, half an hour maybe. And they talked about their school and what they're learning and what they want to be when they grow up. And we, you know, told them what we all had been. And the guy next to me on the right there, he was a doctor, so he could talk about that. And so now this is the train that goes to Machu Picchu, or Aguas Calientes, which is the town at the bottom where people stay. And these are a couple pictures of Aguas Calientes. Well, you take this winding road up, and then you walk up a winding trail, and you see Machu Picchu. And this is about the first view you get. And then a little further up, Freddy took all of our pictures so we could prove we've been there. And so Machu Picchu, no one's positive what it was. It was a royal vacation home, as near as anybody can tell. It had areas that were obviously for royalty because they were the stonework is amazing. But if the king's there are the Inca, he's going to have a ton of retainers with him. And so there's plenty of places where people stay, and they think people stayed there all the time, even when the king or the Inca wasn't there. In the right-hand side, there's a little doorway. That's the official entrance into Machu Picchu. So it could be closed up if anything was happening. And then, of course, that famous peak behind it there that you have to sign up way ahead of time to get permission to go up there, so none of us did. Here's another picture of the doorway, and here's the doorway from the other side. And Freddy's talking about the stonework and the various things. He was an official guide for Machu Picchu in the Cusco area, and you can see he's got his badge on. And so the stonework there where the royal people had lived was amazing. This was less amazing, so it was just their walls going up and down. I'm going to run these through quick because it's almost 20 after 12. Anyway, this was a royal area. The stonework is better. Another picture. This is a temple. I believe this is the one where the sunrise on the solstice comes in a certain window. Temple of the Sun, possibly. I've forgotten. As you can see, though, it's up on a ridge. It drops down on both sides. Going up to the left, you can see a trail going up. That's the trail to the Sun Gate, which we did the next morning. So this is probably still the first afternoon. This is another temple, or maybe underneath that first temple. So the next day we hiked up to the Sun Gate, and so this is the trail going up. Pretty good slog. And in retrospect, I wish I'd just stayed and walked around the ruins, but you get a nice view from up here back down of Machu Picchu. And so the road you see switchbacking there, that's what the bus takes. You have to take a bus, or you can walk up from Aguas Calientes up to Machu Picchu, which is about 2,000 to 3,000 feet elevation gain. So I certainly took the bus. So anyway, we're at the Sun Gate, and this is looking back on Machu Picchu, and that was it. So now we're headed back to Cusco after 3 nights away. This is my favorite picture I took on the trip. Oops, get that out of the way. One of the places we stopped was a bread place, and Freddy bought a big loaf, and we tore it into pieces. This is a place south of Cusco called Tipon, which is another Incan site. I looked it up on Wikipedia, and they're not sure what it was for. They think maybe it was for agricultural research because there's different microclimates in the site, but it's all these terraces with water running through. And we actually saw the giant hummingbird. I don't have a picture of it, but they have a hummingbird that's the size of a robin. It was the largest hummingbird in the world, the Andean Hummingbird. And so all this water has been running since Incan time, 500 years. Sheep. Now here's Sacsayhuaman, sexy woman as the guide called it, and more stonework that's just phenomenal. This was a site of a big battle between the Incas and the Spanish. It was much bigger, and the fortifications were higher, but a lot of the stones were taken to build Cusco after the Incas were destroyed. But the stonework that's there is amazing. And the way it's kind of zigzag is pretty phenomenal. And in the foreground, you can see glacial scars. There's a closer look, because this is up in the mountains. Certainly no glaciers there. Freddy, who grew up in Cusco, said it snowed once while he was there. So it does not snow, even at 11,200 feet. It doesn't snow much there. This is in the city. Here's Christ and the apostles, and they look a little different in an Inca. What's the word I want? A church that is trying to appeal to the native people. So they all look pretty native. And more gold. And so this is a big church in Cusco. And the interesting thing is the bottom layer is all Incan stone that they built a church on top of. And at least once and maybe twice since that happened in the 1600s or so, there have been earthquakes that have destroyed the church, but the Inca foundations were fine. So they understood their area and could build to withstand the frequent earthquakes. So this is inside or near that church and some of the Inca stonework that still survives. This one right in the middle is the smallest stone. It's maybe a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch or so. Looks like the state of Arkansas. And this just illustrates how good they could build things so they're straight. And anyway, this is kind of the central square. Two more pictures in the evening showing the church and the Inca walls underneath it. So this is Freddy and his family. We stopped by and met them all. His wife is to his right, his mom to his left, his mom's boyfriend. His dad had been a policeman and was killed by the Shining Path, who were the leftist terrorists from many years in the 60s and 70s, I believe, 70s and 80s. So Freddy and his wife and his daughter, and then Freddy's brother is on the far left or his right. Now we're heading to Lake Titicaca, and I took this picture. You see this Indian guy all over on buildings, and I asked Freddy what it was. It's some political party, and that's their emblem of the political party. So we stopped at a place called Raquchi, Raquchi, which is another Inca ruin. And I should go here. Yeah, here this is the round buildings, but one of them they put the top on, so you can see what they looked like when the Incas were there. And it was just another Inca settlement. So now we're kind of going over the hill down towards Lake Titicaca. We're at 4,335 meters, which is 14,222 feet. And that was probably the highest in elevation we got on this trip. And we stopped and people are selling things. And I think I bought a throw. And anyway, so here's really quickly Lake Titicaca. We're going to go to where they have the floating islands, which are reeds. They're kind of, if right in the middle of the left is the town of Puno. That's kind of where we were. The floating islands are near there. We took a boat out to Tequil, which is an island, and came back, and then we went up near Lake Umayo for the very end of the trip with a bunch of ruins there. So we're almost done. This is now the post trip. There's 8 of us on this part, including the 6 that had done the whole trip, the pre-trip and the full trip and the last trip. So this is one of the floating islands, and it's sitting on reeds. They last 15 to 18 years. It's a family plus. It's like an affinity group, and if somebody gets the ire of the rest of the people in the group, they can actually saw them out of the floating island and they drift off somewhere else. So it's an interesting lifestyle. I was always kind of wondering what happens when the weather gets bad and you're out on this little floating island, but they've been doing it not that long, like 100 years, 150 years. It was a group of people that were out of favor with whoever was ruling that area. And just went out and built these islands and lived on it. So I think this is all floating. And so we were met there, and they gave us a story on their island and their lifestyle, and they do a lot of crafts and try to sell stuff. So this is Island Los Uros Lago Titicaca. Lake Titicaca, Los Uros. I don't know what that means. Island Los Uros. They make these little mobiles, of which I have one, and reed, various things made out of reed. And we got to ride in one of these boats that they oar. So this is the people that are using their oars to move us along. And then we went to that island I mentioned, Tequil Island, and walked up. I should mention Lake Titicaca is 12,507 feet. So altitude was something. This trip was, kind of put you through the ringer. So I took this picture because this gate, they're using shoes, old soles of shoes for our sandals as their hinge. So we stopped, and at this island, this is a trumpet vine of some sort, which is the national flower of Chile, but Peru has a different name, and if you call it by the Chilean name, they get really mad because they don't like chili. And I think we ate to the left there. There's kind of a tarp in the air, I think, and some benches and tables, and I think that's where we had lunch. This woman is showing us clean wool and dirty wool and how it's washed, and this was our lunch, which was fish from the lake, and and then we walked a mile or so back to the boats and went back to Puno on the mainland. We're almost near the end here. We went to a village near Puno, which was again it's very dry there at 12,000 feet. And I can't remember what this is. This could be lupin. And this woman is freeze drying potatoes. There's these little potatoes, and she would step on them and squeeze the water out, and then they'd freeze overnight, and then she'd do it again the next day. And after about 3 days, the potatoes would last for a long time. We actually tried some at the village we're going to go to, and I did not find them particularly flavorful, but you know, they'll last a long time that way. So we went to this village, and all the people greeted us. There were no younger people. They were all either at school or working. So it was the village elders for the most part. And they have sheep. And this was a place where you could roast potatoes. They would build this little pyramid out of stone and build a fire inside and get it nice and hot. And then they'd throw potatoes in. There's Annie throwing one in. And then they'd, after a certain amount of time, pull it apart and pull the potatoes out, and you could eat it. And this happened to be my birthday. So Freddy told them all, unfortunately, and they all put something around my neck. So I got to wear this for a while, which was fine. It was actually very nice of them. On the way back to our hotel, we stopped where they were having a gathering of villages from all over the area where they would do dances and a celebration, and there were no tourists there except for us. So that was kind of nice. And here's people practicing outside of the main square. And this is Freddy and his goddaughter who lives up there and was in one of the villages, maybe the village we had been at, I don't know. And so now this is our last day, essentially. We're going up to another site called Silistani, which is a pre-Incan site on Lake Umayo, which you might or might not remember from the map. Kimi and a llama, I believe. So there's 4 types of camelids in Peru. Guanacos are the largest. You see them in further south. I did not see any of them in Peru. Llamas. This is in size. I'm going from largest to smallest. Guanacos, llamas, alpacas, and vicuñas. I believe this is a llama. Llamas and alpacas have been domesticated. The other 2 haven't. Freddy's talking about how they plow. She's grinding some flour. Here's the family. Here's some of the various potatoes and grains. I think that's the different couscous in the middle. Not couscous. Anyway. And this guy, this curious guy here. And then we went up to the site of Silistani and walked up, which doesn't look like a huge incline, but at over 12,000 feet, it was very slow. And this is the bus was parked down below in the village there. And we trod our way up there, and they had all these ruins. And this shows you this one was stopped right in the middle of construction, and they would build a ramp and then bring the rocks up and put them in place. So here's Lake Umayo, which is volcanic. Looks like a big caldera. So in some ways similar to Crater Lake. And here's one of the tombs. I believe they're tombs, and they would go in those. They would put them in put the bodies in the little doors there and seal them up. And there's a vicuña. This woman had one there that she had captured somehow, even though they're not really domesticated. And we're leaving that area, and this is the last shot, which is Lake Titicaca with the sunset. So let me leave full screen. Oh no, don't do that. What's going on? Okay. Now, I am done presenting. So anybody have any questions?
Yes, or does Annie want to add anything? Or Suzanne? Or Kimmy?
Suzanne didn't go on this trip.
Oh!
She said snakes in the jungle?
Kimmy didn't join because she has another meeting that she's going into. Yeah. Well, thank you for presenting it. It brought back a lot of memories, but it was very hard, but it was a very good trip. I mean, because of the altitude, you know, I have to stop, and when we climb up to Machu Picchu, especially to the Sun Gate, you know. So, but it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
You drank a lot of Coca Tea, I presume, right?
Yes.
Yes. But even with that, you know.
That's what I really remember. Was a lot of Coca Tea.
Yes. Yes, I remember how hard the altitude was. It was hard.
It was hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the hotels
Yeah.
at altitude would all have oxygen tanks in them.
Yeah.
In the lobby.
Oh.
And earlier as a younger man, Suzanne and I went backpacking in the Sierras and hiked over a 12,000 foot pass, and I really got altitude sickness. So I was worried about this, but I didn't have that much trouble. So
Yeah.
I had a comment that Chilean national flower is not a trumpet vine. It's Lapagaria Rosea.
okay.
It's Chilean bellflower, and it's one. There's only the one plant in the genus, so it's not the same as trumpet flower.
Okay, thank you. So, but was that picture of the Chilean?
I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell from that picture. You know, it could have been.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm just saying it's not a bellflower. It's something else. I mean, it's not the trumpet vine. It's a
right, but it has kind of a trumpetish looking thing.
Yes, yes. You should look it up. It's a beautiful flower, beautiful vine.
Okay.
If there are no further questions, I would like Sam. Thank you. I really enjoyed that. It brought back happy memories of being in the area. But I can see that you had a wonderful trip, and so thank you for Annie and joining us and helping. But yes, I really enjoyed that. So thank you, Sam.